Well, ladies and gents, the cold weather has definitely set in now. It's absolutely freezing today, but I'm still really looking forward to what's ahead. We're at Holly Farm in Leicestershire. This is an old stomping ground of mine. I spent ages here, sort of like in the late 90s, early 2000s, and this is where I learnt to fish commercial fisheries. I'd be here as a teenager, maybe early 20s, 3 times a week, pole fishing, but mainly I'd be on this lake, Trotter's Lake, fishing a little method feeder up to the island, and I had a really good run on this lake. I was really successful in the matches, and what I thought I'd do, because there's some new owners here, I've not been here for maybe 10 years, 15 years in a match, I thought I'd come back and just have a bit of a refresher course on some cool water method feeder fishing. Right, so before we chuck out, I want to just talk through the baits that I've got with me today, because this time of year the fish can be a little bit funny. I don't know what the fish want really, so we've got a couple of different baits and I'll explain why. So first thing, you can't go method feeder fishing without some micros to put around the feeder. So these micros, I've soaked them up before I've left this morning. These are 2mm Swim Stim F1s with 2mm Swim Stim Amino Originals. 50-50 mix, you can see some yellow flecks in there. That's the Swim Stim F1s. And all I've done is I've taken this EVA little bowl, it's got a zip on it, I've poured my dry pellets into there, I've just literally covered them with water and then zipped it up, give them a shake. By the time I get to the fishery, they're absolutely perfect. And you know, I like to keep things nice and simple, and that's a really easy, simple way of preparing your pellets. Your pellets should be soaked all the way through, so they should be nice and soft all the way through. But the sign of a good pellet is when you squeeze it into a ball, you can squeeze it as hard as you want. You see there's a ball there, but then it breaks down into individual pellets. Really nice and easy, and that is the sign of a good pellet. So I've got my pellets there. I've also got some ground bait. Now for me, when I used to visit this venue, pellets weren't even around. We didn't even think about using pellets. We were making our own method feeders. I was actually grinding up my own pellets and adding all sorts of different ingredients to my ground bait to make mine stand out from everyone else's. But I would use essentially a ground up expander. So what I've done today is I've just mixed up a bag of Swim Stim. This is the Swim Stim F1 ground expander. It smells absolutely beautiful, and importantly, the ground expander is quite spongy, so when you mould it around a feeder, it wants to break up. The last thing I want when I cast that method feeder out is for all the bait to just stay around the feeder in one ball. That's so unattractive to a fish. You want it to actually break down into a nice small pile of bait, and that's what this crushed expander will do. So I've got some ground bait with me. Now, as far as bait around the feeder goes, I haven't got a clue what's going to work today. I'm going to start on micros, but it might be a case of adding a little bit of ground bait to the micros. It might be a case that we catch on neat ground bait later on. So what I've also got is just a spare tub on my side tray, and this is what I call my working tub. And what I would do, maybe later in the session, is just grab sort of a handful of pellets, chuck them in there, and then maybe a handful of ground bait, and it's probably just enough in there for maybe 4 or 5 casts, but those 4 or 5 casts will give me a really good indication of whether it's actually going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, I've not ruined my whole mix by mixing the two together. So a working tub for me is essential when I'm fishing this style of method. So hook bait options. What I've done is try to keep things really simple. I've got a few dead maggots, they're on the subs bench, they're in reserve. But what I want to do, bearing in mind I'm putting mainly pellets around the feeder, is try and catch on pellets as a hook bait. So I've got a little bait band on the hair, and what I've got in these little tubs is a handful of 6s and a handful of 4mm hard pellets. I think those little 4mm hard pellets in a band are going to be the winner. But like I say, I've not got a clue. I've not fished here for years. It'll be really interesting to see whether the bigger pellets outfish the smaller pellets, or whether we're even catching on those maggots. Maggots used to be the bait years ago when I was fishing ground bait around the feeder. And quite often, when you're using quite a lot of ground bait in your mix, in your method mix, maggots do seem to be a really good bait. They're nice and light, nice and soft. They go really well with maggots. But I think now pellets are around. Pellets are probably, these small pellets are going to be a winner. Kit for today. So as I remember, far bank on this lake had quite a steep shelf. Obviously we all know the crack with method feeder fishing is to keep your feeder in exactly the same place. Don't move the feeder once it goes in the water. So what I've decided to do is I'm using an inline feeder today. I'm using one of these gripper feeders. They've got little sort of like ridges on the base, so it just helps when the feeder goes in, it sticks to the shelf a little bit better. But also, it's a plastic feeder with a lead base. For me, these feeders just right themselves a little bit faster in shallow water. I've got less chance, because you'll see how we're going to load the feeder as well. We've got less chance of the feeder landing upside down, which, trust me, can happen. So plastic feeder, lead base, all the weight is right at the bottom. There's no weight on the top at all. That's 20 gram, as I say, in line. Because I'm going along the theme of not moving the feeder, I want to use quite a light main line. I've got 5 pound main line, really thin main line. That's M-Tech. Obviously, it's quite a thin line for its strength, that line. 10-foot rod. I used to fish this venue unbelievably. I mean, it's a 20-metre chuck maximum. I used to fish this venue with an 11-foot rod. And looking back, it was just ridiculous that I was using such a long rod for such a short chuck. And I think a 10-footer is just a really good all-round choice for a lot of short commercial fishery work. So I've got a nice soft 10-foot feeder rod. Again, the softness in the rod is going to help when we're using small hooks and feeders that are in line, and obviously quite heavy feeders. Let's talk about the hook length. I've got a really short hook length. It's probably about 2.5 inches. It's 0.14, which might seem quite light to a lot of people for method feeder work. Now, I've got no hesitation going down to sort of like 0.11. I think the more supple the hook length, the more bites you're going to get. And obviously, the lighter the line, the more supple it is. So I've gone for 0.14. I've got a size 18 eyed hook on there. And I've got a tiny little bait band on the end. And that tiny little bait band will obviously house the hard pellets that we're going to use as hook bait. Or if I get a little bit lazy and I want to try maggots later on, I'll just bite the band off and slip a couple of maggots on. I'm itching to get going, so what I've done is I've clipped up towards the far bank. Actually had a few dummy casts without a hook length on, just so I get my range, just so I find out a little bit about the peg, because there's a few overhanging trees over there and I want to make sure that my feeder's going to land in the water and not in a tree. So obviously I don't want to be fishing for squirrels. So I've clipped up, using the line clip on the reel, about 1 foot off the island. Again, when I put some extra weight around this feeder, there's going to be some stretch in the line. I don't want my first cast to go on the island. That first cast can be quite important, because sometimes in the winter, that's your only chance of a fish. The way I'm going to load the feeder, well, let's just put a hook bait in first. I'm going to start on a 4mm, a little 4mm hard pellet. And I'm not using a mould. What I'm actually going to do is just sort of like barely fill the feeder. So I'm going to create a little base in the bed of the feeder. Remember, it's winter time. The fish don't want loads of bait, so I'm creating a base in the bed of the feeder, and then just a few pellets on top of that hook bait. Give it a nice squeeze, and there we go, that's the finished feeder. You can see my little 4mm bang in the centre there, nicely camouflaged with those pellets. Now this is going to be an awkward cast. I've just got to miss the side of that willow tree and land it just underneath a bush, but we'll see how we go. Perfect, I'm happy with that. Now sinking the line. I'm really taking my time sinking the line. I'm not putting any pressure on that feeder at all. I'm just watching the line on the surface, just as it gently sinks below. And you'll see it meet in the middle. There you go, it's just met. And I can just gently put the rod on the rest. I like to fish with quite a slack tip. And that's me fishing. So I've got a stopwatch out. Start the stopwatch and we'll see if we get a bite first chuck or not. Now the peg I'm sat on, historically, was a really, really good peg. It sits out on a bit of a point, you're in the middle of the lake. It just used to be a brilliant peg. But obviously things change over time. I just don't know anything about the lake at the minute, so I don't know what the stocking is. I don't know what are the best pegs. I'm just second guessing everything. But we'll see if we got it right first time. If not, we'll have to have a bit of a mess around with that mix. Maybe add a bit of ground bait. Maybe think about different hook baits or casting in slightly different areas. But I think as a starting point, we're about right. It seemed to take an eternity, folks, for the first bite, but in reality it's probably, well, just coming up to 8 minutes now. It's not a big fish, but it's nice to just get off the mark. I'm just really taking my time because I've only got a little hook on, so there's no point rushing. And I don't know what this could be. I don't know if there's any F1s in here. I'm sure there is a few F1s. There seems to be F1s everywhere, but I've seen a little tiny goldfish top, so it'd be nice to catch one of those. Bit of a fairground fish. Other than this is a little tiny, tiny mirror carp. Look, you can see how hard I ram them pellets on. Pellets still in the feeder, look. Little tiny mirror carp. Beautiful little fish. It's a nice way to start. Let's see if we can catch some bigger ones. So folks, we're 3 or 4 chucks in now, and we've had that little carp, that little mirror we had first chuck, and 2 of his friends, a little common and another little mirror. Not the size of fish that I was hoping for, but obviously the owners here are quite new. They've obviously stocked the lake. There's some little fish in here. I mean, the fish that we used to catch years ago, I'd say the majority of method feeder fish were sort of like 2-3 pounders. There was a stocking of really nice commons in here that were really hard fighting fish, used to feed in all conditions as well. Whether they're still in here, we don't know. But at the minute, I'm still sticking on that line, probably a foot from the far bank. My gut feeling is, if anything, I'm going to have to drop a little bit shorter. I just think with the weather being so cold, the temperatures have dropped, those fish are maybe going to just drop into that slightly deeper water. And I've had a couple of little tiny indications on the tip, little line bites, which just tells me I don't think they're fish around the feeder. I think they're fish between me and the feeder. So I think maybe dropping back a couple of foot from the island just into some slightly deeper water could get me a fish or 2, maybe hopefully some better fish as well. I'm still persevering with little 4mm in the band, pellets around the feeder. I don't think they want a lot of bait. I mean, we've got a few options to think about. I've got quite a lot of room in this peg as well, so maybe starting a second lineup could be the way to go. So maybe alternating the lines, nick a fish from one line and then cast onto the other line could be the way to go. So there's loads of things to think about. Just because I've got a method feeder on the end and that's it, there's still lots of other things that we can do with that method feeder. Bites haven't been quick. They've been sort of like every bite's been over 5 minutes, so it has been a bit of a waiting game. It's just starting to rain as well, so I hope it doesn't get too bad, but I think we'll be okay. I think it's only going to be a little bit of drizzle. But like I say, when bites are like this, it's ideal using the stopwatch because it gives you an idea of how long you can leave the feeder in for. So I've had all my bites sort of after 5 minutes. Obviously there's no reeling in before 5 minutes. And likewise, there we go, that's a bite then. Feels a little bit better, this fish. So likewise, there's no point leaving the feeder in for sort of like 10 or 15 minutes, because all my bites have been, I mean that bite then, 7 minutes. All my bites have been sort of like before 8 or 9 minutes. So it just gives you an idea of when your bites are coming, and just means that you're not wasting any time. So that stopwatch is a really important tool. So as always, again, just taking my time. Doesn't feel massive. This feels probably similar size to what we've had. There you go, little common F1 sort of thing. Little F1. It's a beautiful little fish though. Look at that. Probably, I don't know, a pound maybe? Beautiful little fish. Immaculate conditions. Put him straight back. You can see there again, we've got the pellets still around the feeder. Shows me that bait, there's always some bait around the hook bait, which I think is important. And also, we're reeling a lot of the bait back. And when the fish don't want a lot of bait in the swim, the fact that we can reel quite a bit of that bait back, for me, is a bit of a bonus. So we're getting maximum attraction without feeding the peg necessarily. So I'll just repeat the process again, that 4mm in there. Give it a nice squeeze. Now casting, I'm not zooming it across the far bank, I'm just lobbing it out there. I want it to go in with a nice plop, lead side down. So I'm just gentle. There we go, beautiful little plop. Now I'm so careful not to move the feeder. Again, sink the line, really take my time. Set the stopwatch. I mean, the signs are good because we're getting some bites, and if there's loads of little fish in here, sort of around a pound, it means that in a year or so there's going to be some massive weights. Obviously loads of bites as well, which is good. So there we go, we've got the tip set nice and slack. That means I can see all the little indications. I don't like a tight line going through the water either. So we've got the tip set nice and slack, and all we can do now is keep an eye on the stopwatch, keep an eye on the tip, and hopefully it tows round and we've got a hippo on the end. So since I spoke to you last, we've made a bit of a change. We're dropping a little bit shorter. Not a lot short, but just maybe a couple of foot shorter. I just had it in my head that, you know, with this cold weather and some rain coming now, that those fish were definitely just going to want to be in that slightly deeper water. So we've just dropped a couple of foot short. So we're probably now a metre short of that island. And I guess we're casting into maybe 2 foot, no, sorry. Yeah, 2 foot, 3 foot of water, something like that. And it's paid off because we've got slightly better fish. There we go. Proper carp this time, a little common carp. Again, cracking condition. Beautiful little fish, and you can see that obviously we're fishing quite a scaled down approach, and it's working really nicely. I imagine in the summer months it's absolutely rigid with fish. It's a fish every single chuck, but obviously this time of year it's just nice to get the tip pulled round a few times. I'm still on the pellets, and to be honest, I can't see me using anything but these micro pellets. I mean, it's going quite well, and I just feel that if I was to put ground bait in the swim, it just might attract some even smaller fish, or just might be a little bit too much bait in the swim, as in particles in the swim. Whereas with these micro pellets, I know that a few are getting eaten. I'm coming back with most of them around the feeder, so I'm not leaving a lot of bait in the swim. So again, really gently sink the line. I've got to be careful because of these leaves on the water. It's amazing how every bite comes at about the same time. I wonder if the fish just sit there looking at the bait, then all of a sudden maybe another couple of fish come in and a bit of competition, and all of a sudden they decide to have a chew. There we go. Nicely sank, set the tip. Perfect. A little tiny indication then on the tip. I think there's a few more fish milling around now. We're getting towards sort of like midday, so it's usually the warmest part of the day in the winter. And a few fish just maybe start feeding as the temperature increases by maybe just a degree or so. Well, we've not got long to go now, and to be fair, I've enjoyed myself. We've had plenty of bites, which at this time of year is all you want really. No massive fish, none of those old warriors that I used to catch sort of like 10 or 15 years ago. I wonder if they're still knocking around. But we've had loads of sort of like pound fish, pound a piece, couple of smaller ones, couple of bigger ones. And we're getting little indication then. We're getting little indications most casts. Which is good when you method feeder fishing. Just shows that there's a few fish there. Obviously, because we're fishing quite close to the far bank, not every bite's been a proper tow round. Quite a few fish have just sort of hooked themselves, a little tap of the tip, and then you get a little tiny drop back, which obviously the fish has dislodged that feeder off the shelf. But it's been good, it's been nice fishing. We've scaled everything down from summer fishing, so maybe during the summer I would be using a 6mm on the hook or in the band, whereas 4mm, I've not put anything on but a 4mm, and I think that has been the way to go. So it just shows, obviously, scaling the amount of feed we put around the feeder, scaling that down, scaling the hook bait down, scaling the line diameter, the hook size, scaling it all down to make it a bit more subtle has been the way to go. So I'm hoping just for a few more fish, maybe 2 or 3 more fish, and then I think we'll call it a day. It's been a nice visit back. I've had a chat with the owner, the new owner. Obviously there's big things planned. I think they're going to try and run a few competitions, few matches once everything gets going again. I mean, this place is literally 5 minutes from my house, and I haven't fished it for 10 or 15 years, so maybe it could be a place that I start visiting a bit more often. There we go, another little drop back. Same again, that's why I do like to strike, because obviously you've got to catch up with the fish as the fish swims towards you. And also I like to just make sure that the fish is hooked properly. And obviously with a soft rod, it's hard to pull the hook out of a fish's mouth unless you go absolutely crazy when you're playing the fish. So I'm just going to really take my time. Sometimes you can just gently reel and just let the rod absorb everything. Another cracking little F1. And I must say, every fish, I mean, I've mentioned it already, but every fish is in great condition. Look at that, beautiful little fish. Cracking little fish. So another little tiny F1. I say tiny, it's about a pound. Beautiful fish. Again on that 4mm pellet. I'll put that in there. I think that, I can't see us catching any bigger fish today, to be fair. We've tried our hardest, but I'm not moaning at a bite of chuck from fish like that. I've not had a keep net in, but I reckon I've had, what, £30, £35, something like that, which on a cold winter's day, I'm happy with. So, I hope you've liked my little method feeder, my cold water method feeder approach. And until next time, tight lines.